You've probably heard the term IVF thrown around, right? In vitro fertilization. It sounds super scientific, and, well, it is. But it's also this incredible process where science and biology come together to change lives. So today, we're going to break down exactly what it's all about. So what is it in simple terms? At its heart, IVF is all about taking the fertilization process, egg meets sperm, and moving it outside the body, into a lab. Then, once you have a tiny little embryo, it gets placed back into the uterus. The goal, of course, is a successful pregnancy. It's quite a journey, and we're going to walk through it step by step together. Okay, but before we get into the how, let's talk about the why. Why do people even go down this road? Well, the reasons are, as you can imagine, super personal, but they usually boil down to a few main situations. For a lot of folks, it's a powerful tool for addressing infertility when getting pregnant the old-fashioned way just isn't happening. But it's not just about that. IVF also opens the door for women who want to become a parent on their own. And if a male partner is sterile, using a sperm donor through the IVF process is a way for a couple to build their family. All right, to really get why IVF is such a game changer, we kind of have to do a quick refresh on how conception normally works. Let's call it the biological blueprint for pregnancy. So in nature, it's this amazing sequence of events, right? First, an egg gets released from an ovary. It heads into the fallopian tube, and that's usually where it meets up with sperm. Bam, fertilization. Then this brand new embryo takes a little trip down to the uterus. And here's the really crucial part. It has to implant itself into the lining of the uterus. That's the moment that really kicks off a pregnancy. Okay, here's a term you're going to want to file away. The zona pellucida. Sounds complicated, but just think of it like an eggshell. It's this protective outer layer around the tiny embryo. And for that embryo to actually implant in the uterus, it literally has to hatch out of this shell. Seriously, remember that detail. It's going to pop up again and be super important later. Right, so what happens when that whole delicate, natural process hits a snag? When fertilization isn't happening or that implantation part is tricky. Well, that's exactly where a medical intervention like IVF comes into the picture. It's designed to help get past those specific roadblocks. And now we're diving into the IVF process itself, starting with step 1, preparation. You can think of this as mission prep. It's all about getting the body ready and gathering all the biological building blocks before the real lab magic can begin. So this phase has a few moving parts. For the woman, it involves taking fertility medication to get her ovaries revved up. At the same time, a semen sample is provided so the lab can isolate the absolute healthiest sperm. And of course, if a sperm donor is part of the plan, this is when that all gets sorted out. And those medications, they have a really, really specific job. See, in a natural cycle, a woman's body typically matures and releases just one egg per month. But with IVF, the goal is to improve the odds. So these drugs encourage the ovaries to grow and mature a whole batch of eggs all at once. It's kind of a numbers game. All right, prep work is done. Now we move into what is really the heart of the whole thing, creating the embryos. This is where the action shifts from the clinic to the lab, into that highly controlled, high-tech environment where fertilization actually happens. First up, they have to get those eggs out. The procedure is called an egg retrieval. It's pretty amazing to watch. They use an ultrasound to see exactly where the follicles are. Those are the little fluid-filled sacs holding the eggs. Then, using a super thin needle, a doctor carefully guides it to the ovary and collects the eggs from each follicle. Okay, the eggs are officially in the lab. Now what? Well, there are two main ways to get them fertilized. The first is standard insemination. You basically put the eggs and a bunch of healthy sperm together in a dish and let nature take its course. But sometimes you need to be a little more direct. That's when they use a technique called ICSI. It's wild. They pick out one single healthy sperm and inject it directly into the egg. No guesswork involved. So once fertilization happens, the job isn't done, not by a long shot. For the next 3 to 5 days, these brand new little embryos are kept in the lab and watched like a hawk. The embryologists are monitoring them, watching them grow and divide, and assessing their quality. Hey, remember that eggshell we talked about, the zona pellucida? Well, this is where it comes back into play. Sometimes, to give the embryo a little helping hand, the lab will perform something called assisted hatching. They make a teeny tiny hole in that outer shell just to make it a bit easier for the embryo to hatch out and implant once it's in the uterus. It's like pre-cracking the egg for it. So after those few days of growing and developing in the lab, what's the fate of these embryos? Well, the lab selects the best-looking one, or sometimes a couple of them, for transfer right away. And what about the other healthy ones? They don't go to waste. They can be cryopreserved, frozen, and stored, which is amazing because they can be used for another try later on. And that brings us to the grand finale of the procedure, the embryo transfer. This is it. This is the moment that all the prep work and lab science has been leading up to, returning that tiny embryo created in a lab back to the uterus, hoping it will find a home and continue its journey. The transfer itself is actually a pretty quick and relatively painless procedure. A speculum is used, just like for a regular pelvic exam. Then the doctor takes a very thin, soft tube, a catheter, that has the embryo inside loaded in a tiny drop of fluid. They gently guide that catheter through the cervix and right into the uterus. A little push of the syringe, and the embryo is released. After about 15 minutes of rest, that's it. It's done. And when you think about it, the timing is just incredible. This final transfer happens just 3 to 5 days after the eggs were first collected. That's exactly how much time the embryos needed to grow in the lab. It's this perfectly timed, carefully choreographed dance between biology and modern science. So there you have it. From hormone medications to fertilizing in a dish and finally placing an embryo back where it belongs, IVF is an unbelievable journey of science and, a whole lot of hope. Once the transfer is done, the medical process is complete. All that's left is to wait. And it really leaves you with a big question to chew on. What does this incredible technology really mean for the future of building a family? Something to think about.